Welcome. I'm Kevin, and I'm with the Secular Student Alliance, so a national organization that represents non-religious students, so atheists, humanists, non-religious students, all across the United States. So in college universities, high schools, we even have chapters starting in elementary schools now. And I think one of the important things to recognize is as the United States continues to get more and more non-religious, almost just over 84% of young people today, so students today, identify as being non-religious. And by the next presidential election, if statistically we keep going in the same direction, the majority of young people will be non-religious by the next presidential election. And so we work with students to make sure that they're building community and that they're coming together to have events, protect the separation of church and state, and free speech and freedom of and from religion. So I'm happy today to be here with Andrew Seidel. Andrew is an author, lawyer. He has talked on numerous talk shows nationwide. So his legal career has been in the field of the separation of church and state and defending the freedom of and from religion. He is currently working with Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. He has written 2 books, the first really sort of on the founding of the United States and why that was founding, and you can tell by our flyers that was not a Christian nation. And his second book really gets into sort of Christian nationalism and the movement in the United States. And so he really is an expert in talk on the topic today. And so we're very glad to have him. So please join me in welcoming Andrew.
Just a sec here. Thank you so much for hosting me. Do we have a government of the people, for the people, and by the people? Or is ours a government of the Christians, for the Christians, and by the Christians? And not just any Christian, the right kind of conservative Christian. That is the battle that we find ourselves in right now. That you find yourselves in right now. America is in a desperate fight against Christian nationalism. And Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the organization that I work for, is leading the charge against this un-American ideology. Now, Christian nationalism is a political religion premised on the claim that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. That we were based on Judeo-Christian principles, whatever that vague phrase might mean, and that we have strayed from that foundation. And they use the language of return, of getting back to our godly roots, to justify all manner of oftentimes hateful, even evil public policy. Think back to June 1st, 2020. This is when then President Donald Trump had peaceful protesters gassed, beaten, and brutalized with rubber bullets so that he could walk to a church to pose for a photograph with a Bible. The point of that malignant stroll was to show that we are a Bible-believing, Bible-beating, churched nation. That we are a Christian nation, and that anyone who disagrees should be beaten and gassed. The goal of Christian nationalism is to redefine or rewrite the Constitution so that it creates 2 classes of people. The right kind of conservative Christian and everybody else. Conservative, white, heteronormative Christian men will become the favored in-group that the law protects but doesn't bind. And everybody else is going to be the disfavored out-group that the law binds but does not protect. Now, we call them Christian nationalists because they want a Christian nation, and they wrongly believe that we were founded as a Christian nation. But America will never be a Christian nation, because the moment we become a Christian nation, we will cease to be America. Christian nationalism is fundamentally opposed to the aspirational values that we have yet to live up to. Values and ideas like we the people, and equal justice under law, and these other founding maxims. These are the values that we fight for every day at Americans United. These are the values that Christian nationalists fight against. Christian nationalists are not just wrong about what America is and how it was founded. Their beliefs and identity run counter to the ideals on which this nation was founded. They are un-American. And they're also pretty unpopular. They oppose marriage equality. 71% of Americans support it. They want to outlaw abortion. 85% of Americans think it should be legal. They want a country, a nation of Christians like them. 73% of Americans are more welcoming of religious pluralism. They'd almost certainly like to ban contraception too, but something like 91% of Americans are in favor of contraception. And those numbers terrify them. They are scared. They are scared because of you. They're scared because the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, are on the rise. Because Americans are leaving religion behind. Because we elected our first black president and a black female vice president. Because of marriage equality. Because every day we are closer to racial and gender and LGBTQ equality. Conservative white Christian Americans' status as the dominant group in America is threatened. It has been for some time. They're losing the culture wars, which is, I think, a silly phrase that often masks open attacks on human rights. They are losing the privilege and the power and the deference that they believe they are due. And when that happens, when a dominant group or caste in a society feels threatened or feels left behind by circumstances, it reacts or it overreacts in ways to retain that status. That is why they are turning to Christian nationalism. That is why they are turning to, for instance, the violent insurrection that we saw on January 6th. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. And they are doing massive damage because they channeled that rage and that fear of status loss into a plan to target and capture our courts. And this was a well-planned hostile takeover of one branch of our government. They played the long game. Really, this began probably after Brown versus Board of Education, with the rise of the religious right and the moral majority and school vouchers and choosing abortion as their wedge issue to avoid sounding like the racists they were. Now, Leonard Leo is a name that you may have heard recently. Leonard Leo is universally recognized as the guy, the man who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. And a former employee of Leo's described his mission like this, quote, "He figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception, conservatives didn't stand a chance, so they needed to stack the courts." Pause to really think about that. They needed to stack the courts. That's what they did. Notice the anti-democratic admission, confession in that quote. If they don't stack the courts, the majority would rule. If they don't stack the courts, democracy would work. And we already talked about where public opinion is, where we the people are on every one of those issues. The whole point of this hostile takeover of our courts was to subvert the will of the people, to subvert our democracy. Another employee described Leo's job during this period as, quote, "the monitor of the nominee's ideological purity." And they're talking about judicial nominees there. All told, we know that Leo is responsible for the confirmation of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Thomas is an old friend of his. In fact, there's video of the two of them on stage at a Federalist Society event down in Dallas, I believe, a couple years ago, where Thomas is joking about how Leo is the third most powerful man in America. All 6 of those justices are or were members of the Federalist Society. So that's 6 votes on the Supreme Court. And Leo personally chose 5 of them for their ideology. And that ideology advances white Christian nationalism. Overall, we know that Leo's groups spent at least $540 million packing the court. That's what we know of. And you do not spend that kind of money to get an impartial court. You don't spend $500 million to put someone who's just going to call balls and strikes on the court. And that was what John Roberts testified he was going to do. They bought the Supreme Court. But that was only half the strategy, because Leo and the justices have plenty of help from other Christian nationalist groups out there. There is a $1 billion shadow network of these groups that are operating to bring this cause to the forefront. So there's these legal groups in this billion-dollar shadow network, groups like, you might be hearing their names now, the Alliance Defending Freedom, the American Center for Law and Justice, the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, First Liberty Institute, Liberty Council, kind of this Orwellian word salad. And these groups are on the opposite side of every single case that Americans United brings, sometimes more than one on the opposite side. For instance, right now, Americans United is suing Oklahoma alongside our friends at the ACLU and FFRF and a few others, because the state there approved the country's first religious public school. And you heard me say that correctly. That's not a mistake on my part. A religious public school. And it looks like at least 3 of these groups are getting involved in that. And in case after case, this court and these groups are working together to make that white Christian nationalist fever dream a reality. And they're doing this by forging a new weapon for Christian nationalism. So like Sauron and the Ring, like Voldemort and the Elder Wand, or Thanos and the Infinity Stones, they are seeking a weapon of power. And their weapon is religious freedom. Religious freedom protects everyone. It guarantees our right to be blasphemous, godless heathens, or Christians, or Jewish, to worship no God, or one God, or every God in every holy book. In other words, religious freedom is a shield. It is a hallowed protection against government overreach, the minority's protection against the tyranny of the majority. And it is a right that has been guaranteed by a strong separation of church and state. In fact, that right cannot exist outside of the separation of church and state. But not anymore. And because of this packed court, because of this billion-dollar shadow network that Americans United is so busy fighting, that protection of religious freedom that's enjoyed by all of us, or supposed to be enjoyed by all of us, is now a weapon of supremacy and privilege for the few. Religious freedom is now the weapon of Christian supremacy. And when I say they are weaponizing religious freedom, I mean precisely that. I'm not trying to be scary here. In case after case, they are litigating the legal meaning of religious freedom as a constitutional right, and in the process, they are redefining it. And this is the book that Kevin mentioned, American Crusade. I tell the stories of these cases in that book, and here are just a few of them. Okay? In 2012, the court said that religious freedom means that religious organizations can discriminate when they're hiring clergy. And then in 2020, the court weaponized that against employees who have no religious duties. In 2014, the court said that the religious freedom of a company's owners can override the rights of other citizens. And then it upheld Christian-only prayers at the town of Greece. In 2017, the court focused on religious freedom for only a church's religious freedom, and ignored the religious freedom of everybody else in the state of Missouri, and said that religious freedom means forcing those taxpayers to fund a Lutheran children's ministry and church. In 2018, the court manufactured a claim of hostility toward religion, and then used that to let a Christian business owner violate state civil rights laws and discriminate against protected classes of people. That's the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. 3 weeks after bemoaning hostility towards religion in that case, because it was hostility towards Christians, the court then upheld Donald Trump's Muslim ban. What happened to religious freedom in that case? Well, it's not for Christians. Not for non-Christians, excuse me. In 2020, the court said that taxpayers must fund religious schools, another betrayal of the religious freedom of every single citizen out there. And then later that year and into the next, it said, public health measures, we're going to start striking those down in the name of religious freedom too. And then in 2022, it abolished reproductive freedom, forced taxpayers to fund indoctrination at bigoted Christian schools in the name of religious freedom, and allowed a coach at a public school to impose his personal religious beliefs on other people's kids in the name of religious freedom. Now, if you pay attention to the news, these religious freedom cases are superficially about private school vouchers or bakeries and website designers and gay weddings or coaches that just want to pray, but really they are about power and privilege. Literally about privileging the right kind of conservative Christian over everybody else. The goal of these Supreme Court cases is the goal of Christian nationalism. Recall, conservative, white, heterosexual Christian men will become the favored in-group that the law protects but does not bind. Everybody else is a disfavored out-group that the law binds but does not protect. And this is what Americans United for Separation of Church and State is fighting against. This is why I wrote my second book, American Crusade. And by the way, this worked. The ploy to capture the courts worked. If, in case it wasn't obvious from that litany I read out, we actually have data to support this. And these studies don't include the two most recent terms from the Supreme Court, so the numbers are actually far more striking than what I'm about to tell you. But before the court was packed, before John Roberts was Chief Justice, religion won about half the time in front of the court. And that's what you'd expect, right? About half the time you're going to win, half the time you're going to lose. But at the Roberts Court, that win rate jumps to 81%. From about half to 81%. And importantly, this is not a pro-religion shift, this is a pro-Christian shift. In early courts, mainstream Christianity won 44% of the time. Under John Roberts, that number jumps to 85%. That is nearly double. And it's actually higher now, because again, those numbers don't take into account the two most recent terms. Religious freedom has become a weapon of Christian privilege. And just to be 100% clear, the religious freedom cases that the court is deciding are not difficult. These are not hard legal cases to resolve, unless of course there's some ulterior motive behind them, which is what I'm arguing. All you have to do is draw 3 simple lines to resolve most of these cases. And the first line that we draw is we distinguish between action and belief. That your right to believe is absolute. Your right to act on that belief is not. So I open American Crusade with some stories about drivers who let Jesus take the wheel. Actually let go of their car going down the highway and let Jesus take the wheel. Now, they are free to believe that Jesus is a backseat driver, but if they act on that belief, the government can step in and say no. Maybe they'll get a speeding ticket. Maybe they'll get fined. Maybe they'll get their license taken away. Maybe they'll be forced into therapy. Right? Belief is unlimited. Action is limited. And so that brings us to the second line, which is, okay, if it's clear that the government can step in certain circumstances, when? When is it okay for the government to step in? And the answer here is pretty simple too. It's where the rights of other people begin. You've all heard that your right to swing your fist ends where somebody else's nose begins. Your right to exercise your religion ends where the rights of other people begin. Religion is not a license to harm others or infringe their rights in any way. And I'm actually going to repeat that because this is something that is really becoming lost these days, including here on the West Texas A&M campus. Religion is not a license to harm others or infringe their rights in any way. Now, line number 3, the third line, is also pretty easy, and that is the line between church and state. Our government has no religion to exercise, nor may officials abuse government power and resources to promote their personal religion, like, say, a coach or a university president. Church-state separation, the third line, is really a through line for everything. Whatever issues you care about, defending the separation of church and state is almost a panacea. Do you want better education? Do you want full funding for public schools instead of vouchers for private religious schools? Do you want accurate science about sex and evolution taught in our classrooms? Do you want full civil and political rights for LGBTQ people and women and minorities? Do you want a greener world and a healthier environment? Do you want America to get serious about climate change and shun its deniers? Do you want access to better and universal health care? Do you want scientific research to be guided by scientists? Do you want our responses to pandemics to be guided by science and not wishful thinking? Do you want reproductive justice and rights to be fully realized? End Christian nationalism, separate church and state, and you're going to see progress on every one of these issues. And let me give you one particularly poignant example of how church-state separation connects to some of these other issues in ways that you may not realize. Missouri. Right? Missouri legislators banned abortion. Now, abortion bans violate the separation of church and state because they impose one narrow religious viewpoint on all of us using the force of law. And this is really obvious in Missouri, where the legislators literally wrote into the abortion ban that, quote, Almighty God is the author of life. It says that in the law itself. And they repeatedly said the quiet part out loud during the debate over this bill. Here are just a few examples. Quote, as a Catholic, I do believe that life begins at conception. And God doesn't give us a choice in this area. He is the creator of life. And being from the biblical side of it, I've always believed that life does occur at the point of conception. So Americans Unite for Separation of Church and State and the National Women's Law Center sued. We challenged Missouri's abortion ban as a violation of church-state separation. 14 faith leaders from 7 different denominations are our plaintiffs in that case. Our clergy plaintiffs support abortion access, not in spite of their religious beliefs, but because of their religious beliefs and their commitment to church-state separation. And by the way, church-state separation is what protects true religious freedom. That's one of the reasons so many clergy joined this lawsuit. Church-state separation is the reason that so many Americans believe in so many different religions. So if you are a believer, if you are religious and you oppose church-state separation, you might ask yourself whether everybody in power shares every one of your beliefs. Because they almost certainly don't. And without church-state separation, they are coming for your freedom at some point in the future too. You're only safe without church-state separation as long as it's your people in power. And that, by the way, is exactly what Christian nationalism is all about. So church-state separation protects us all. Church-state separation protects pretty much everything. And church-state separation also protects your drag show. At least it protects students at public universities from overzealous officials who might abuse their power as a university official to impose their personal religion on you and ban your drag show. But West Texas A&M President Walter Wendler doesn't care about, in his own words, what, quote, the law of the land appears to require. Now, I'm going to set the stage for some of you who look a little confused and for people who are watching at home. One of the campus groups here, the LGBTQ campus groups on West Texas A&M, Spectrum WT, planned to host a drag show on March 31st as a fundraiser for the Trevor Project, which is an LGBTQ suicide prevention group. And my friends here, Bear and Marcus, wave Marcus hi, who are part of Spectrum WT and also part of WT Secular Student Alliance, go SSA, thank you for hosting this, they committed to a PG-13 drag show. Right? This was a drag show with no lewd conduct, with no profane music, no alcohol, no minors without parents. They jumped through all the hoops. They got the venue approved, the music approved, and they were advertising the event and selling tickets. And 11 days out, President Wendler cancels the show. There are no complaints, just an email from President Wendler canceling the fundraiser. And oh yes, he put it in writing. Now, before I read you some of that misbegotten and godly email, let me just tell you about a few of the events that Wendler, who has been president here since the fall of 2016, did not cancel. Did not cancel the community night of worship and prayer hosted by 4 churches. That was allowed to go forward. Did not cancel One Marriage and Family Ministries, a local organization, not a student organization, which promotes marriage as a, quote, covenant between one man and one woman under God. And now I have to pause here for just a second, because our new Speaker of the House is a big proponent of covenant marriage. He has dedicated his entire career to advancing Christian nationalism, working with some of the most hateful Christian nationalist groups out there, members of that billion-dollar shadow network that I was talking about before, like the Alliance Defending Freedom, like First Liberty Institute and the Family Research Council. He says that America is a Christian nation. He wants to ban marriage between same-sex couples and ban abortion nationwide. He thinks the state should tax citizens to fund Christian ministries, like Ken Ham's Ark Park, which is that huge ark in Kentucky that argues that dinosaurs were on Noah's Ark and that the earth is only 6,000 years old. He blames mass shootings on the teaching of evolution, among other things, including feminism. He and his wife believe in conversion therapy. He thinks there's a war on Christmas, and he believes that the Bible formed the basis of our Constitution. That's who is second in line for the presidency right now. So back to the events that President Wendler has allowed. Also a fundraiser for a Christian camp that promotes a, quote, traditional view of marriage. Those were all allowed to proceed. So why did Wendler cancel the drag show? Because Wendler's personal religious beliefs and prejudice, that's why. And he told us this. He wrote, quote, "I believe every human being is created in the image of God and therefore a person of dignity. Being created in God's image is the basis of natural law." That's not true. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, prisoners of the culture of their time, as are we, I don't know what that means, declared the Creator's origins as the foundational fiber in the fabric of our nation as they breathed life into it. Also not true. I could do a whole talk on why those two things are wrong. I mean, I'm tempted to go down that rabbit trail with y'all right now, but I won't. If you want, I wrote The Founding Myth Why Christian Nationalism is my first book, and I get into some of this stuff in it. Or if you want to ask me in the Q&A, I'd be happy to do it. I mean, it's so wrong on so many levels. But he continued, and so shall we. Quote, "The WT community should live by the golden rule. As a Christian, I personally learned this in the book of Matthew. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." And while he does mention other religions' versions of this rule and bizarrely Newton's third law, he is still clearly and openly basing his decision to violate your rights on his personal religious belief. He is abusing the power of a public office at a public university to impose his personal religion on other people. The great Alexander Hamilton, A. Ham, told us that the US president, the United States president, has, quote, "no particle of spiritual jurisdiction." No particle of spiritual jurisdiction. That goes for presidents of state schools as well. Wendler still has more to say. Quote, "No amount of fancy rhetorical footwork or legal wordsmithing eludes the fact that drag shows denigrate and demean women. Noble goals notwithstanding. A harmless drag show, not possible." A harmless drag show, no such thing, was also the title he gave this email when he posted it on his blog, which often contains his personal religious views and his musings on how he should bring those views into the university here. A harmless drag show, no such thing, not possible. I have questions about that. I really do. So many questions. But here is one. When does drag really become harmful? When does it become a threat? Because I'm wearing a pink shirt and a pink tie right now. Is pink on a man a threat? If so, how? Because pink is just a color. Right? It's just electromagnetic radiation. All visible light falls on the spectrum between like 380 nanometers and 700 nanometers. And pink is just our brains mixing the two ends of that spectrum, violet and red. So how does the electromagnetic radiation interact with my body in a way that is a threat to President Wendler? What if I, a man, put on earrings? So back when I was in high school, and I was really cool, I had my ears pierced, one of them. I don't remember which one. It was right at the top. It was really cool then. But a lot of guys have their ears pierced. How is this a threat? Or is this a threat to President Wendler? What if I wear a rainbow feather boa? This is getting feathers everywhere. This is sealed in a pack and somehow has still gotten feathers all over all of my stuff. Am I a threat now? Yes? No? Not sure? All right, well, what about this? This is a skirt. This is a skirt. So what if we do that? Because this is not a kilt, right? This is a skirt. So what if I, a man, were to put on a skirt? I already have my pantyhose on. Like, by the way, the founding fathers that Wendler is so fond of quoting, right? They were always wearing pantyhose. Let me just get my pants up here. Yeah. Now, am I a threat now? Now I'm in earrings, a boa, skirt, pantyhose. Is this a threat? If so, how? And if not, let's do it for real. Okay. These are my blue suede shoes. As you can see, these are my high heels. Let me just give me a second here, because listen, I was given instruction on what were appropriate high heels for me to do, and here we go. Okay, so I'm stepping into my heels. So am I a threat now, President Wendler? If so, how? Lost in here. Do I need to vote? What if I show a little more lip? Is this threat more? How is this a threat? I gotta be honest, I don't feel much like a threat. I feel a little fabulous. But I don't feel much like a threat. Drag is not a threat. Drag is a human constant. Since there have been clothes, there has been drag. As RuPaul likes to say, we are all born naked, the rest is just drag. Look, hell, Adam and Eve wore the same thing, fig leaves in the garden, right? Look, you cannot have Shakespeare without sartorial swapping. And not just because women weren't allowed on stage at the time, but because cross-dressing is a part of the plot in many of his plays. Merry Wives of Windsor, The Merchant of Venice, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Cymbeline, The Taming of the Shrew, to name a few. Elsewhere in literature too, Achilles, Hercules, Huckleberry Finn, Éowyn in Lord of the Rings, I Am No Man. Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre, Lord Byron's Don Juan, The Scarlet Pimpernel, Sherlock Holmes, War and Peace. Hell, in Little Red Riding Hood, you even have a wolf dressing up in women's clothes. Do you have any idea how many movies have stars dressing up as the opposite sex? Tyler Perry has made an entire empire out of his Medea movies. Every piece of clothing you wear every day is selected to give a certain impression, to make others perceive you in a certain way. Suits are drag for professionals. Skinny jeans are drag. Hoodies are drag. It's all made up. It's all drag. Drag is not a threat. Drag is art. Drag is human. Drag is beautiful. But there is one way in which drag is a threat. And I want to thank Kiara Johnson of the National LGBTQ Task Force for pointing this out at the Summit for Religious Freedom, which was last April. The Summit for Religious Freedom is an amazing event. Registration is now open if you go to thesrf.org. Really recommend it. It's free for students to attend virtually. I hope you will all go. And there are actually also scholarships for students to attend. And Kiara pointed out there that drag, and that really so many LGBTQ people are just a threat to the binary. Alok von Mennen said something like this. He wrote a book about this. My friend Kate Cohen actually wrote about this in the Washington Post back in June, that drag is a threat to the binary. Threats to the binary. That is drag. Drag is a threat to the binary upon which white Christian nationalism depends. Are you straight or not? Are you white or not? Are you male or not? Are you conservative or not? Are you Christian or not? Anything more complicated than this binary threatens the narrow world, which reflects only their straight, white, conservative Christian patriarchy. The existence of humanity outside of that binary, let alone the equality of humanity outside of that binary, feels like a threat to them, because it threatens their patriarchy. Well then, down with the patriarchy. Woo. Now, Wendler also wrote in his letter that drag is misogyny. Those snickers are an appropriate response. Drag is a rebellion against Wendler's patriarchy, against the Christian nationalist patriarchy. Wendler did not cancel your drag show out of concern for women or women's equality. Wendler canceled the drag show because he was defending the patriarchy, and nothing could be more misogynistic than that. That's what I mean when I say the Christian nationalists are raging against the dying of your privilege. Wendler violated your rights, and if there is any doubt, he confessed. He admitted it. In that letter, he wrote that he canceled the show, quote, even when the law of the land appears to require it. He knew what he was doing was illegal, but he did it anyway. And that is, I think, incredibly important because you didn't take that lying down, you sued. And for this bravery, I really think every one of you deserves a standing ovation, and I'm not kidding, so please stand up and applaud. And I think this is truly an amazing thing that you were willing to do. Bravo. I am in awe of your bravery and your industry and your willingness to fight back against this fascism. Truly, I am. And when I heard the show was canceled, I immediately reached out to Secular Student Alliance National, to Kevin, and I said, I want Americans United to bring this lawsuit. I'm excited. What can we do to help? Kevin said, look, they've already got it covered, but I have been following that lawsuit pretty closely. Unfortunately, Wendler is not the only Christian man who is willing to abuse his power, and that is again because Donald Trump and Leonard Leo packed the courts. They packed the federal judiciary with ideologues and zealots, and one of those ideologues is Judge Matthew Kaczmarek. Now, AU, Americans United, has a truly brilliant policy team, and they do all this amazing work behind the scenes on Capitol Hill that we can't tell you about and don't get to talk about, which from a comms perspective can be frustrating sometimes. But they do this really amazing work, including opposing awful judicial nominees. And there have been many, but Matthew Kaczmarek always stood out for me because he actually worked at a Christian nationalist legal outfit based here in Texas, at the First Liberty Institute. And this is where he worked. First Liberty Institute has been on the opposite side of many cases for Americans United, including the case at the Supreme Court that you heard about of the coach imposing his prayer on other people's kids. I've been on the side of a number of cases from them, even from before my time at AU. And First Liberty Institute wants Christian supremacy. It has fought to keep evolution out of public schools and Bible classes, Jesus portrait, and school-imposed prayer in those public schools. Now, it wraps this supremacy in the mantle of religious freedom, in the language of religious freedom. That is Kaczmarek's ideology. He was always going to abuse his power. That is why Leonard Leo and Trump wanted him on the bench in the first place. Remember, you don't spend $500 million to put impartial jurists on the court. This was a hostile takeover. And in his short tenure, Kaczmarek has acted like a theocrat who is drunk on power. So far, he has tried to impose a nationwide ban on medication abortion, restricted minors' access to birth control, tried to force the Biden administration to reinstitute Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, openly rejected legal binding decisions of higher courts because they protect LGBTQ equality. Oh, and in Doe versus Planned Parenthood, he seems likely to want to force Planned Parenthood to pay a $1.8 billion penalty. And if you're thinking, wow, that seems like an awful lot of important cases to go before some lowly district judge in the middle of nowhere, Texas, you are right. They are bringing those cases before him on purpose because he is the only judge that can hear them. So when they brought the Mifepristone case, which was organized by the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, one of this billion-dollar shadow network, they incorporated the group of plaintiffs just around the corner from the courthouse so that they could bring it in his courtroom. But despite that record, I just want to be absolutely clear here. You are right. You have a right to host a drag show. You have a right to dress in drag. You are right. And by the way, there are judges in Florida and Montana and Tennessee and Utah who happen to agree that drag is free speech and that you are right. Wendler is wrong. Kaczmarek is wrong. The Fifth Circuit, which is actually packed and like one of the most conservative circuits in the country, if not the most, it's more conservative than our Supreme Court. And it's a reason that bringing cases before Kaczmarek is so attractive because they hear his appeals. And they're likely going to get this appeal wrong. I am a constitutional attorney. I've got 2 law degrees. I've got a host of awards. I've got a small library of publications. I wrote a textbook with another law professor about religious freedom for law students to learn from. I've written 2 popular books on the subject. I've litigated these cases in court. I've spent more than a decade litigating before I moved into comms. And I worked at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the country's leading defender of that founding principle and the liberties that spring from it. And I am here to tell you, whatever these men say, you are right. And I will link arms and fight alongside you in drag, if necessary. And I'm going to close out because I want to take some questions. I know you have some. I just want to say that America invented the separation of church and state. That's an American original. The idea was born in the Enlightenment, but it was first implemented in the American experiment. It is time that we reclaim that heritage and bury the lies of Christian nationalism. This is not a Christian nation. Our law does not belong to the Christian nationalists. It belongs to we the people, all the people. Whatever you call yourselves, whatever you wear, whoever you love, all the people. And it is about damn time that we take it back. Thank you. So for questions, Kevin has a microphone that he can walk around and hand to folks if you have a question you'd like to ask.
So I just have to ask, because you mentioned the inherent misogyny of basically calling drag shows women face, I think was a word used in that email. And what do you think about the fact that drag kings never seem to get mentioned, even though they're very much there?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. You know, I mean, this was a really interesting talk to prepare and write for, not just for this. This is new to me. But I learned a lot when I was researching and writing this. In fact, about 4 weeks ago, I was out at a place in Wisconsin where I live called Spring Green, and there's a really famous theater out there called the American Players Theater. And I saw Merry Wives of Windsor as I was preparing for this talk, and cross-dressing is like the central theme, and you could not have that play here on campus. If the drag ban that was imposed on the state of Texas had not been enjoined, you couldn't perform Shakespeare on stage. I do think your point about drag kings, I think that shows the inherent hypocrisy of a lot of what is happening here. And it's a good one.
Hi, so I was wondering if you knew about Wendler prior to the drag ban, or did you find out about him via the drag ban that happened back in March?
I did not know about Wendler before that. But my first encounter, I did not know about West Texas A&M University. I've been through Texas many, many, many times. I used to live in Pueblo, Colorado. I have family in Dallas, Houston, Austin. I come and speak all the time, but I wasn't familiar with the university even. I've feel really privileged to have gotten to know Marcus and Bear a little bit during this time, and I'm so impressed by their activism. I'm blown away by it. Whenever I see students who are willing to stand up to this, and when I think about what I was doing in college, I'm so impressed, and I can't wait to see what they do with their futures. Anybody else? Okay, behind you too, Kev. Nobody wants to ask what I'm wearing.
How would you describe Kazimirik's process for canceling, or at least throwing out parts of the lawsuit?
So Kazimirik's decision, he's asking about the judge's decision in the case. I was reading it again last night just to refresh my memory, and I have to say, it's so bad on so many fronts. I mean, it is reverse engineered is the best way to describe it, right? This is not a person who is applying law to a set of facts. This is a person who has a preordained outcome and is reverse engineering everything to meet that outcome. And it becomes very, very clear reading his opinion that that is what he's doing. I mean, it's one of the most illogical out there opinions I've ever read. One of the really interesting things about the initial lawsuit was that it sued President Wendler in his personal capacity. Now, that means they sued him not just as president of the university, but as Walter Wendler the man. Now, that's usually pretty hard to do for a public official, but your case for it is actually remarkably strong. And it's because of that language that Wendler wrote in his confession that he was banning this drag show even though the law of the land appears to require it, right? That is him saying, I know I am not allowed to ban this show, but I am doing it anyway. And the standard for getting at a public official who is abusing their power in their personal capacity is that they knowingly and deliberately violated what's called well-established law. And he's admitting it there. He's admitting it there. He should have been held liable in his personal capacity. I mean, he should have lost on all counts. This is not a hard case. And there's really good precedent on it, and FIRE is a very competent organization, and Adam, the lead attorney on it, and I have chatted in the past before. Not surprised that Kaczmarek went the wrong way, and I won't be surprised if the Fifth Circuit does as well. In fact, I expect it, but that's why I really wanted to spend time at the end of that talk telling you that you are right. No matter what these judges who are put here to make these kind of decisions do, you are right. You are right. You are right.
So, what do you think we citizens of various occupations, can do to help fight these legal attacks, like with Kaczmarek and London?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really good question. I think you saw a little bit of it last night. Voting is like one of the most important things you can do, and I know that sounds trite, and I know it probably sounds frustrating, but it is absolutely true. We would not be in this situation if everyone voted. We'd be in a much, much different place. But I also think you have to get active. I mean, certainly get involved with the Secular Student Alliance here on campus, help make it a vibrant group that the administration doesn't want to mess with, right? You can do that. Kevin will help you do that. I think standing up to Christian nationalism, wherever you see it, is, whether it's online in the comment section, whether you're seeing it here on campus, whatever that may be, not letting it pass by unchallenged is key. And as you advance further in your education and further in your career, I would really encourage you to think about running for office. And I know I do talks like this all around the country, and when I say that, I can see a lot of people lose interest. And over the years, I've found those people afterwards, and I've asked, I saw the way you reacted when I say run for office. Like, why'd you react like that? What it is a lot of people are like, well, I am not qualified for public office. Lauren Boebert is in the United States Congress. Marjorie Taylor Greene is in the United States Congress. Now, your students, maybe you want to finish your education. You also don't have to start with Congress, right? If you are here, you are qualified to run for something. And in fact, there's an organization called Run for Something that will help you do that. I'd also really encourage you to join up with some of the other national organizations like Americans United at au.org that is doing this kind of work. AU has some really, really cool programs that are for youth. We have something called our Youth Organizing Fellowship that we do every year. We get a new cohort of around 20 to 30 youth leaders who we teach to be organizers and on-the-ground fighters for these principles. And they go on to do some really, really cool stuff. I mentioned already that we have the scholarships so that you can attend the Summit for Religious Freedom virtually for free, but you can also go to DC and be there in person, meeting with some of the leaders, meeting with the youth organizing fellows. I'm gonna be there. We have a day where we go on to Capitol Hill and we knock on legislators' doors. We have meetings with members of Congress. A couple celebrities showed up last year. So there are many, many, many ways that you can get involved. The number one thing, though, I think is standing up for right whenever you can, and standing by people who are doing the same, even if it's maybe not your particular issue. There's another one back there too.
Hey, so the Supreme Court being stacked makes me feel a little hopeless.
Yes.
So of course I vote, but like, what's an antidote to this organization that can stay there until they die?
Yeah, well, so one thing you can do is make that an issue in your voting. So talk to candidates about what their plans are to deal with the Supreme Court. And a lot of people who you'll talk to, especially, there's something called an institutionalist, right? An institutionalist is somebody who really respects the Supreme Court as an institution. They recognize like that maybe it has been captured and taken over and fine, but like we believe in the institution itself. If that is you or somebody you are speaking to, then that means the institution needs to be checked in some way, shape, or form. And you've probably heard about the various plans or ideas out there, recommendations. You can try to put term limits on the justices. That's pretty hard because the language in the Constitution that gives them lifetime tenure is in the Constitution. So the justices themselves will be the ones interpreting any kind of term limit. However, there are some really creative and interesting ways that people are getting around that, which would be that they still would be on the court, but they would rotate off active duty, they would go to senior duty, things like that. There's some really creative ways about doing it. And the ethics code is obviously a big one. So term limits, ethics code, and then expanding the court is another big option that is out there right now. And you can be asking your candidates, whichever party is running, what are you planning on doing about this? Are you for term limits? Are you for ethics reform? Are you for expanding the court? And if not, why not? And making that a central issue, if you look at the numbers, it has become more, all of those have become more and more and more favorable, so that now there's even a majority in favor of expanding the Supreme Court across the country.
Hi.
Hi.
I work for a local school district here, and I like what you said about like fighting on the local level or whatever. My principal is very religious, and I'm in the minority.
Sure.
I'm also worried about retaliation.
Yeah.
So like when he sends emails or asks for prayers, or even on the school district level, like we've had like all the teachers meet together and there's been prayer support. What advice would you give for someone who's not comfortable with that, but also isn't confrontational, but something needs to be done about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And it's one of the reasons that Americans United for Separation of Church and State exists. So we have a full-time attorney on staff whose only job is to communicate with people in communities who can't speak out for themselves or stand up for themselves. And what Ian does is he fields these complaints that come in through our web or through the phone or through even the mail, and he will take action on their behalf while protecting their identity. So he will say, we heard from somebody in the community, whatever identifier it is that you are comfortable with, to protect you and point out what the law says. This is something we do. I mean, he probably sends 4 or 5 letters like this, I don't know, in the time I've been talking. Okay, not that many. But, we do a lot of these. And we're able to fix a lot of those violations just by pointing out what the law says without having to go further than that. And explaining, like, look, when you're acting as the principal of a public school, and when you're using the power of that position, the PA system, your power over teachers, you are not acting as Mr. Jones, you are acting as Principal Jones. And when you're wielding that official government power, you cannot use it in a way that imposes your personal religion on other people. That's what Wendler did wrong here too. One of the many things that Wendler did wrong when he canceled the drag show here too. So the bottom line, go to the AU website, au.org, and there's a legal tab and you can report a violation, and then we will look into it and help you. And anybody, anywhere around the country can do that.
There seems to be this weird idea in especially this region and especially this campus that freedom is some kind of limited resource. And like this idea that just because someone who's an atheist is able to have a drag show or have an event like this, that takes away from Christians, it takes away from their events. What would you have to say to that about the idea that us existing doesn't take away from what you believe?
Yeah, freedom is not pie. I mean, it goes back to the idea that when you are accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Right? That's what it is, because it's not actually the fact that you have suddenly vindicated yourself and fought for your rights and attained your rights and are not sitting quietly by. It's that they have expected that. They've grown accustomed to that. They're used to that. They expect you to sit quietly and not show yourselves, to be part of the background. Right? That's what I was talking about at the beginning of the talk when I was talking about the power and the privilege and especially the deference that they believe they are due. They expect a certain amount of deference from everybody else in this country. This is one of the central themes of Christian nationalism. If you want a really good example of it, go look up Justice Sam Alito's speech that he gave in Rome after overturning after overturning Roe versus Wade, after he handed down the Dobbs decision. So this is like one of the greatest moments of his life, right? Like he's been organizing and working towards his entire career overturning Roe versus Wade. Does it, gets to go to Rome to hang out at this religious freedom conference that's put on by the Notre Dame Religious Liberty Initiative, which is one of the groups involved in the Oklahoma case that I mentioned, another one of these billion-dollar shadow networks. He's speaking there, and go watch what he's saying. This man is so offended that they won. Right? And it's because people are angry about it, because people are willing to stand up for their rights. They are not giving him the deference that he believes he is due. And this is what you see time and time again from the Christian nationalists. But it really gets back to that quote that when you are used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's what you're talking about, Marcus. Hi.
Hi. What do you do when, or how do you advise we handle it when we're the only one in a group who believes in this kind of stuff? Like when you're on a team where the norm is Christian nationalism and you're potentially debating against 5, 6 more, maybe more people. How do you handle being the only one?
It's the hardest, isn't it? It's so hard to be the only person, to out yourself, to stand up for what you believe in when there's nobody backing you up. That is when it is the hardest. There's a story that one of my friends used to tell, and he was in Alabama at this tiny gathering in a house of atheists in Alabama. And this is in like the late 70s. So to be an atheist in Alabama in the late 70s was like a thing, right? So they're passing the word about this by word of mouth only. People are really hesitant to talk. And the host is chatting with my friend who tells this story, and somebody opens the door and kind of tentatively walks in and sort of starts and looks at the host, and then the host sort of does the same thing, sort of starts. And they were backdoor neighbors. Their backyards connected with each other. And they've lived like that for 30 years, and neither of them had ever touched on the subject of religion, but both of them were atheists. Right? It took this like tiny little bit of pulling down that barrier to realize that they shared this in common. Now, one of the things that you mentioned was, how do I go and how do I debate 5 or 6 people? And you don't have to debate. You don't have to convince anybody that you are right. Simply standing up and saying, that's not true. The United States was not founded as a Christian nation, or what you are talking about right now is contributing to a movement that says I am less than a full citizen of this country, or that I do not have the same amount of rights as you. And I know you're a better person than that. I know that's not what you mean, but the rhetoric that you're using right now does that. You don't have to argue with them. And oftentimes you're going to get far more out of an interaction by recognizing that that person is a human that is attached to a bad idea than trying to change their mind. And I have found that doing that and leaving the door open for further conversations and planting those seeds of cognitive dissonance and doing it in a way that is kind and gentle so that they can come back to you when they have more questions is going to be far more effective. There was a guy who was on the opposite side of me of, it wasn't quite a court case. I had written a letter, basically like one of the ones I was just telling you about, and this lawyer calls me up and says, got your letter, I guess you're right on the law, but I want to talk to you about like this secular government stuff. And we have this back and forth. He's like, give me a book that I can read by the end of it. And I corresponded with this guy for 5 years, and he went from this like very, very conservative person who didn't understand freedom of religion or the separation of church and state to a member of a group that supports the separation of church and state. And it was because I didn't go into it to try to change his mind. I went into it to have a conversation with him, and was not shy about standing up for what was right. So it's hard, and you don't have to do it every time, but I would encourage you to, and I think you'll feel pretty good when you do.
Hey, I know I already asked a question.
That's okay.
Okay, you mentioned how the opinion felt reverse engineered, and of course there's the whole if you're accustomed to privilege, which I totally agree with. Mm-hmm. But how much do you feel that the entire belief system is reverse engineered as a justification for why they're miserable? Because I've met most of them. I've met plenty of Christian nationalists. They're not fun to be around.
I'm not sure that I'm entirely following that. I mean, I will say that I think that there are a lot of Christian nationalists out there believe this stuff because it's all they have been confronted with their whole lives. They've been steeped in the myths and the disinformation their entire lives. Christian nationalism is an entire identity that is built around disinformation, right? The idea that the founding fathers prayed at the Constitutional Convention, that our Declaration of Independence references the Christian God 4 different times, that in God we trust and one nation under God reflect our founding values, that George Washington knelt in the snow at Valley Forge and prayed that our laws are based on the 10 Commandments, right? None of that is true. Every single one of those is a myth. But it is gospel to them. And often, so my first book, The Founding Myth, gets into this a lot. And there's a group of people, or there's a kind of people that I hear from regularly who were raised in very sheltered Christian households, homeschooled. If they went to college, they went to a very small Christian school, and lived these very sheltered lives, closed information systems. And when they broke out of that and started to learn, and really learn about the history of our country and science, there's a lot of feelings of betrayal that go along with that, but I often hear from these people who they will read The Founding Myth and they will reach out to me and they're like, I had no idea. I did not know any of this. So I don't think we want to attribute to them some sort of misery, or even necessarily malice. A lot of these are people who are stuck and they don't know any better. Because that's all they know. And there are plenty of people who, when they learn, and when they know, and when they are presented with new information, can change their minds and do. And I absolutely think that we can relegate Christian nationalism back to the fringe whence it came. And we're not going to convince every Christian nationalist that they are wrong, but we can certainly push them back to the fringe whence they came. And I think we need better facts and better arguments primarily. And that's one of the things I try to do in The Founding Myth. That's what that whole book is about, is giving people not just the facts, but better arguments to have those discussions and reach that kind of understanding.
Hello.
Hi.
That's a lot. So I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Christian nationalist. I fall under a collection of doctrine known as Two Kingdom Theology. It's a long thing. So it feels like there's two camps right now. There's people who are Christian like me, and it feels like the vast majority of them are Christian nationalists. And then there's people who don't believe in Christian nationalism, but it feels like they're mostly secular. So I guess there's a camp of Christians who aren't Christian nationalists who feel kind of squeezed. So I guess it's like almost a two-pronged question. I guess,
Yeah.
do you have a mission to the Christians who aren't necessarily Christian nationalists, and like, do you guys have any like open stream of dialogue
Yeah.
with those guys?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mentioned our Missouri case, right? 14 clergy from 7 different denominations are our plaintiffs in that case. Americans United has a faith advisory council that is made up of clergy from different denominations that advise us. There are members of clergy on our board. In fact, the organization was started by clergy. There's a group that I work with. I was just on a panel a couple weeks ago with Amanda Tyler. Amanda Tyler is a member of the clergy. She runs the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. I was also on that panel with Sam Perry, who is also a Christian, who has written a couple books on Christian nationalism, including Taking America Back for God and The Flag and the Cross, both of which I recommend. And I'm very close with both of them. We published together, Amanda and I spearheaded a report on the role that Christian nationalism played in the January 6th insurrection. Sam Perry was part of that report, Andrew Whitehead was, Anthea Butler, Jamar Tisby, right? All Christians. Catherine Stewart was part of it. I work with Christians to fight Christian nationalism all the time. We're not going to beat Christian nationalism without Christians. In fact, Amanda runs a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. So if Americans United doesn't sound like your cup of tea, even though it should, go to au.org and join. Check out Christians Against Christian Nationalism, right? And I get that. I understand why you feel squeezed. But I do think it's up to Christians to really take this fight to the Christian nationalists. And it's one of the reasons I support the work of that group so much and work with them so often.
And what President Wendler did not only hurt LGBT students and non-religious students, also hurt Christian students.
Okay. My parents are very, very strictly conservative Catholic, and we've had many, many conversations about every topic under the sun that is like controversial in conservative spaces. And one difficult thing is that the both of us will bring up well. I heard about or read about something that counters your point about what you think is happening. But my parents and my kids and I've been doing school, blah blah blah. It's like amid the limited amount of space that people have to talk about and debate these things. And both my parents are very much, show me the evidence, show me the documented stuff that might change my mind. But between busy people and between like so many exhaustive topics to go through, what do you recommend? What would be like your top source if you could give someone to start changing their mind?
So if it was one thing that I could do for you, what you are describing is people trading talking points or trading quotes, and you're never going to make progress out of it. So the one source that I would point you to would be active listening. Learn about active listening, and I would reframe what they are saying to you back to them and ask questions about it that force them to go find the answers for themselves, as opposed to you clubbing them over the head with this is the actual truth, this is the actual fact, this is the actual answer, right? So I hear what you are saying. What do you think that means for X? Or how do you think it would apply in this situation? And be genuinely curious about what it is they are saying. First of all, they will respond better to that when you are speaking with them. you will get closer as a family, which can be really, really difficult when you have these kind of divides. I have a lot of close friends who've gone through things like that, and some who have lost family altogether, either because they came out as non-religious or they came out as LGBTQ or something like that. So it's a very real thing. So that would be the one source that I would point you to. If you really are like, no, I need like actual talking points, au.org does have a ton. Why separation of church and state isn't actually in the text of the Constitution, but we have pages for all of that. The founding myth, if you have ever heard that we were founded as a Christian nation or on Judeo-Christian principles, every argument that is ever made on that front, I answer in the founding myth. And they never make new arguments ever. It's the same ones time and time again. It's crazy how few arguments they have. But the one place I would direct you would be to learn about active listening, and also try to reframe it and really try to ask questions back that force them to do the work, that force them to go look for the answers. And there are going to be times where they're just going to be looking and they're going to be finding their talking points and then bringing that back to you, but they're going to get to the end of the barrel sometime. And then maybe they'll even ask you, like, what do you think? Or you could provide them with a resource.
Hey, sorry, me again.
It's okay.
So, for me and a lot of people, I'm very passionate about this kind of thing, but it is not safe for me to be public about this. I'm out on campus, but I can't be out at home at all. I can't do anything that would end up on the internet, stuff like that. Yeah. So how can we help when we can't be public, when we can't risk something getting back home?
Yeah, safety first, okay? And I should have said that earlier. I mean, safety first above all things. But that is also the reason why people out there who can stand up for others, who are not stuck in an unsafe situation at home that really could threaten their health or their well-being, that is why you have a duty to stand up when you see something like this. If you can do it safely, you have a duty for people who can't. So take everybody who heard that question, think about that when you're thinking about whether or not you ought to say something or not in a certain situation. But safety first. Be safe first. There's going to be a time when you are not reliant on others and can be out on your own, and then you can figure out what your activism will look like. And maybe it's just voting quietly in the voting booth now. And that's all you can do. Or attending Secular Student Alliance meetings under the guise of something else, if that's all you can do right now. And that's okay. Safety first.
Hi. I want to thank you for actually bringing up people like myself who are former Christian nationalists and the things that we go through as we pull ourselves away from that. But I also wanted to mention to this young man over here his point about the misery. From my own personal experience, I think the misery is actually born out of that belief system. Because it creates such a cognitive dissonance to our own humanity.
Well, I'll let you two chat about that.
But I also wanted to, having been in that realm and part of a very large organization of Christian nationalists who were raised to become the leaders of the country.
Sure.
As part of this stacking the deck against everybody else.
Yep.
What can we do? What are the resources that we can use to start doing the same thing?
Yeah.
So teaching other people how to stand up. I was raised with a stupid little song about standing alone.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that AU, that Americans United, is really, really focused on. We've spent the last few years really studying what the other side did, and studying the long game that they played, and figuring out how we can implement something better that improves the country instead of trying to drag us back to a time when conservative white Christian men ruled. And that is one of the driving forces that Americans United right now. We're not talking about a whole lot of that publicly, but if you want to get involved, we are talking to a number of people who were involved in the Christian nationalist movement, in pulling those levers of power, prepping to pull those levers of power. So join up and let us know that that was what you were doing, and if you have information, we're happy to do that. We are very, very busy playing the long game right now in a number of different ways. And if there's anybody out there who's got Wilkes Brothers money that wants to fund that, we're listening.
So, my question, how do we as adults who are mostly part of this secular organization, there are a lot of LGBTQ and secular youths that may not have access to information like the internet or your books. Yeah. What would be some of the best ways we could get this information to youths who may be unable to attain this on their own?
Yeah, I'm not the best person to answer that question. So I'm going to pass on that question, and I would direct you to some of the LGBTQ organizations that have more experience in that than I do. Because again, I think safety is a really, really important thing when you're talking about that. And I wouldn't want to say something that would jeopardize that for those students. So I'm going to pass on that question. But it is a good question, and I hope you do run down the answer with some of the LGBTQ groups.
Well, Andrew, I just want to thank you very much for being here and talking with the group, and thank you for all of your questions and your participation in this as well.
Thank you so much, everybody.